Hello, everybody. Welcome again to Squared Circle Calendar. On this episode, we're going to take a trip back to May of 1975 to look at the happenings in the world of professional wrestling around that time period. Things including the inclusion of New Japan and All Japan's annual round robin tournaments, to the happenings surrounding the NWA World Title, to what was going on in the WWF, as well as some territory news and some of the big news stories of the day. Oh, without no further ado, let's get going here. So first off, we're gonna take a trip over to Japan in May of 1975 and take a look at what was going on there. First off, we're gonna stop in on New Japan, Antonio Inoki's Federation. As I was telling you guys last month, um, each year around in the spring, um, all Japan, New Japan, All Japan do a singles round robin style points based tournament, um, in which as they go, the first round is kind of a round robin system where it ends up the top 2 point getters, top two point earners will usually meet in the final. Of course, the 1975 New Japan's 1975 World League, the second one, ran from April the 4th to May 16th, 1975. The round robin portion of the tournament ran throughout April, with Killer Call Krupp um, winning the point version of the tournament with 13 and a half points, but there being a four-way second place tie between the NWA, between New Japan's version of the NWA North American Tag Champions Antonio Inoki and Seiji Sakaguchi, NWA International Heavyweight Champion Kentaro Oki, and Strong Kobayashi. The four of them each ended up with 12 and a half points, setting up a semifinals round. In that semifinals round, Sakaguchi and Oki wrestled to a double disqualification at 2 minutes and 23 seconds, and then um, in a just slightly over 20-minute match, Inoki beat Kobayashi via submission to advance to the grand final, in which he beat Killer Carl Krupp via submission at 16:42. So the finals came down to Inoki and Krupp in the World League, in which Krupp was the points winner and Inoki won the overall tournament. So, also in Japan, going on around the same time, in All Japan, while New Japan was hosting its World League during that time frame, All Japan was hosting its Champion Carnival at around that time. Um, Champion Carnival ran a little bit differently. Now, in terms of the Champion Carnival, the way they would run it would vary year by year. Now, the 1975 Champion Carnival ran from April 5th to May 3rd of 1975, representing all. Yeah, and I know I probably mentioned some of this, but I'm just for a quick review. This was the first couple of rounds were set up as a 14-man single elimination tournament to determine the final four. Representing the seven wrestlers representing All Japan included the NWA International Tag Team Champions Giant Baba and Jumbo Tsuruta, along with the PWF United States Heavyweight Champion, the Destroyer, Akihisa Takachiyo, who many of you would know later as the Great Kabuki, Samson Kutsuwada, Great Kojika, and Matoshi Okuma would round out those representing All Japan. Representing the Gaijin, or the foreign wrestlers for the tournament, would include the following: former NWA World Heavyweight Champions Big Thunder Gene Kiniski and Killer Kowalski, as well as other NWA, including Mr. Wrestling Tim Woods and his Mr. Wrestling Mark Lewin, Mike George, Mark Lewin coming down from Northwest Promotions in Vancouver, Mike George coming from Central States, Steve Kern representing Georgia Championship Wrestling, and Bob Orton Jr. representing Championship Wrestling Florida. With Samson Kutsuwada and Mr. Wrestling Tim Wood getting first round buys into the second round. The final four coming down to Knitsky, Destroyer, Baba, and Mr. Wrestling. So those were the final four. Once we get to the final four, which ended up, as I said, being Giant Baba, Gene Knitsky, the Destroyer, and Mr. Wrestling, they proceeded to go into a round robin style tournament in which they all faced each other one time, and the one who would get the most wins in that situation would win the tournament. As it turned out, Giant Baba would win the tournament, would win the overall champion carnival, beating all three of his opponents. Gene Knitsky getting two wins and 2 points in the tournament, defeating the Destroyer and Mr. Wrestling, and the Destroyer would get his one win against Mr. Wrestling, with Mr. Wrestling being shut out. So Giant Baba would win the entire carnival, champion carnival. So that's all that came down through from Japan. Now, as we move on, our next stop will be in the United Kingdom, in London, England, in which and we have to make a stop off, so as per was tradition back then, now every week, of course, on television station ITV in Britain, they would have the program World of Sport, which you could say was Britain's version of the program we knew as Wide World of Sports here in the States, in which it was kind of a hodgepodge of different sports coverage, primarily soccer and pro wrestling, but they would also cover, of course, tennis and, golf and all that. But it was primarily soccer and pro wrestling. So, as is the case, the first week of May is a big weekend in soccer fandom, as that's the FA Cup final. And as part of the FA Cup final coverage, during halftime of the final, World of Sport Wrestling would host its 1 hour show during the halftime of that show. And as part of that show, they crowned the tournament final for the World of Sport trophy. Now, from late March through all of April, they got together some of the top welterweight and lightweight talents in all of Britain, and they would engage in a tournament in which they would be competing for the World of Sport trophy. They would compete for the World of Sport trophy to determine who among the top welterweights and lightweights was the best on the World of Sport wrestling program. The finals came down to Leon Fortuna of Tonga and John Naylor of Wigan, in in which John Naylor won the trophy. Now, of course, moving on to North America now to talk about some of the happenings in North America and Canada. In Canada, throughout Canada, throughout North America, from Canada as far south as Mexico. We go through Canada. We come first to, of course, um, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, where basically going up and down the Eastern Time Zone from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, through Detroit, Michigan, down into Georgia. You'd have Abdullah the Butcher and the Sheik engaging in a series of battles, up and down the Eastern Time Zone there, from Toronto all the way south to Georgia. Um, as they would be having a lot of bloody battles even down in Georgia. They at one point were teaming together again in a match against Mr. Wrestling 2 and Andre the Giant. I'll get more into that in a few moments, though. But basically, one of the big rivalries going on at the time in May, up and down the Eastern Time Zone, was Abdullah the Butcher and the Sheik. They would battle each other, throughout, from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, to Detroit, Michigan, down into Georgia. So of course, the states, as we head first to northeast, to the northeast section of the country. Bruno Sammartino was continuing his feud with Freddie Blassie's faction, taking a break though from his matches with Spiros Arion to defend his title against Waldo von Erich. Another one of he would defend the WWF title against Waldo von Erich at the monthly Madison Square Garden show. Also happening in May, of course, the Valiant brothers, Jimmy and Johnny Valiant's 6-month WWF World Tag Title reign would come to an end, as they would be defeated on May 13th in Philadelphia, dropping the titles to the team of Dominique DeNucci and Victor Rivera. As at the Philadelphia Arena, DeNucci and Rivera would defeat the tag team, the Valiant Brothers, for the titles. So that was the big news in the WWF story, as many of you know now today as the WWE. Now during that time too, the Valiant Brothers would be fending off the challenges, of course, not just of DeNucci and Rivera towards the end there, but also from the guys they took the titles from back in November '74. Tony Gurria and Dean Ho, and then you also had the Grand Wizards team of Bobby Duncum and Killer Kowalski at times in the mix there as well, as a top contender, the WWF Tag Team Championships. So, now as we move on into the Mid-Atlantic area of Virginia and the Carolinas, Wahoo McDaniel and Paul Jones, while also trying to secure the Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight Championship from Johnny Valentine, they would eventually beat the Andersons, Gene and Ole Anderson, for the Mid-Atlantic version of the World Tag Team Championship. This is, of course, the World Tag Team Championship that would eventually become the WCW World Tag Team Championship. But in May, on May 15th specifically, Paul Jones and Wahoo McDaniels would beat the Andersons, Gene and Ole Anderson, also known as the Minnesota Wrecking Crew, for the World Tag Team Championship, becoming the only face team to hold a belt during that time, with Ric Flair being the Mid-Atlantic Television Championship, fending off the challenge of Paul Jones, and Johnny Valentine being the Mid Atlantic champion, fending off the Wahoo McDaniel's assault on the title, as well as the U.S. title being held by Harley Race. Now, as we head down into Georgia, of course, as I mentioned earlier, you did have the rivalry between um, Abdullah the Butcher and the Sheik um, going on down there. Andre the Giant was on tour down there as well. He was wrestling in Georgia throughout the month of May of 1975, and of course, Abdullah the Butcher was also fending off the titles. Being the reigning Georgia heavyweight champion at the time, he was fending off the challenge of Mr. Wrestling 2 for that title. Um, Basically throughout much of the South. I'll get to that part in a moment, but yeah. So you had you had Abdullah Butcher fending off the challenge of Mr. Wrestling 2 over the Georgia heavyweight title. You had a rivalry going on between the one team of Bob Armstrong and Robert Fuller, fending off the challenges of the Assassin and Toru Tanaka, not just in Atlanta, Georgia, but also in Macon and Columbus, and you know throughout Georgia, those rivalries. As we now move down to Florida, among some of the big stories there include um, Jack Briscoe and Dory Funk Jr. engaging in a series of title matches over the NWA, in which Jack Briscoe was defending the NWA World Title against Dory Funk throughout Florida, going back and forth between Florida and West Texas primarily. Among some of the other areas that Jack Briscoe was defending the NWA would also include Georgia with some title defenses against Mr. Wrestling's 1 and 2, as well as in Texas against not just Dory Funk Jr., but also against Ricky Romero, even challenging Ricky Romero for the NWA Rocky Mountain heavyweight title um, under the Western States promotion, as well as having matches against and Western States version of the NWA International Heavyweight Champion, Ciclo Negro, Jose Lothario, and Red Bastion as well. Also down in Florida, there had another rivalry kind of heating up a little bit between Harley Race and Terry Funk. Now, as I was saying, in Florida, one of the other big feuds that was going on in May of 1935 was between Harley Race and Terry Funk. Harley Race, the reigning NWA Missouri heavyweight champion, as well as being the reigning Mid-Atlantic version of the NWA United States Heavyweight Championship. But even during his time in Florida, would along with tag partner Roger Kirby would gain for a short time the NWA Florida Tag Team Championship as well. This rivalry would serve as a significant rivalry in that both Harley Race and Terry Funk were being groomed as main eventers at this point. Now, Dory Funk Jr. was still getting his rematches with Jack Briscoe. They've had a number of matches throughout the early 70s over the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. But now, Terry Funk was, as I mentioned, Harley Race was the reigning NWA Missouri Heavyweight Champion. That's significant because at the time that was being built as kind of the stepping stone, well, if you win the Missouri State Heavyweight Championship, then you're eventually gonna, get some significant shots at NWA World Heavyweight Champion. Now, of course, in '73, Harley Race did serve as kind of a transitional champion to get the belt from Funk Jr. to Briscoe. Um, but he would also, during this time, work his way up to becoming a main event star himself. Terry Funk was also being pushed as a was being pushed up the card, being, groomed as a main eventer, not just engaging in this feud with, he was already a main eventer in Western states, considering that was his home territory, but he was, he's also oh wait, he's also, being groomed in that he's not only engaging in a feud here with Harley Race, but he was also engaging in a feud with Bob Roop over the Florida heavyweight title. Of course, Terry Funk had already had some success in Florida, having been a television champion as well as a tag champion there. The tag championship he would, of course, gain with his brother, and I believe he was also, prior to this, at one point, the Florida version of the NWA Southern Heavyweight Champion as well. So, so these two were basically in '75. They were being groomed, groomed towards main event status. We're starting to see that more now here with Terry Funk. Starting to get pushed up the card there a bit. During his feud, of course, with Harley Race, during Terry Funk's feud with Harley Race, Bob Roop was feuding a little bit with Dick Slater. So as we move on now to the Gulf Coast territory, which covers the Panhandle of Florida, along with Mississippi and the southern half of Alabama. Ken Lucas, who had been a dominant force in that area, having held 4 titles in that area, 3 city titles, and then the Gulf Coast title itself, being that he was the Pensacola heavyweight, Panama City heavyweight, and Mobile heavyweight, as well as the Gulf Coast heavyweight champion. Well, during the month of May, he would drop the Gulf Coast title to Dr. X, Red Osborne, a former NWA World Junior Heavyweight Champion. He would drop the Gulf title to him, but he still held the 3 city titles, so he's still a pretty strong figure in the Gulf Coast region there, and was always considered still a top contender. Bob Kelly, the Mississippi heavyweight champion, major force in the Mississippi portion of the territory. So as we move up into Tennessee now, we see a lot of back and forth between Ron Fuller's Southeast Championship Wrestling and Nick Gulas's NWA Mid America, as Ron Fuller was also the reigning Tennessee version of the NWA Southern Heavyweight Championship. The Fullers were at one point engaging in a feud with the Bass brothers, and managed by Sam Bass. Let's see. As I was saying, you had rivalries going on between like the Fullers and the Bass brothers, throughout Tennessee and both Southeastern Championship and Mid America territories. And as we head up into Detroit, as I mentioned earlier, of course, you had the Abdullah Sheik feud going on. Aside from that, of course, Bobo Brazil had won back the Detroit version of the NWA United States Heavyweight Championship from Abdullah the Butcher in the early part of May, and was now, or may have even been as far back as late April, actually. But he had won the title back from Abdullah the Butcher and was defending it again, throughout May against Killer Carl Cox. There was one match in the Olympia, I think on May 20th, and I happened to watch that match. And, so going into this match, Bobo's build weight was 299 pounds. Killer Carl Cox's build weight was 251 pounds. So this 250-pound man getting this 300-pound man up in what is known as a brain buster, which a brain buster is you go from a suplex, kind of from what they call a front chancery, like you're going to do a suplex, but when you bring them up, instead of just simply falling back, you drop them straight down on their head. So that was. So now, as we move on to the Central States area, for about a couple weeks there, Jerry Oates was a double champion, having been the current reigning Central States heavyweight champion. He, along with his brother Ted, would defeat Yasu Fuji and Oki Shikina for the Central States version of the NWA World Tag Team Champions. So for a couple weeks there, he was a double champion until Ed Wiskowski beat him for the Central States heavyweight champion. Now, Ed Wiskowski, this is the same guy who would eventually become Colonel De Beers in the AWA. He would also have a run in the Pacific Northwest in the late 70s alongside, Buddy Rose, late 70s, early 80s. But this was still early on in his career. When he was wrestling in Central States, he was engaged in a rivalry with Jerry Oates over the Central States heavyweight title. Of course, by the end of May, Mike George would also make his return to Central States from Japan, being over there on the Japanese tour for the Champion Carnival. And as we go through St. Louis real quick, as part of their feud in May there, on May the 2nd, Harley Race would defend and retain the NWA Missouri State Heavyweight Championship against Terry Funk at the Keel in St. Louis, and then 2 weeks later, of course, be defend and retain against former AWA World Champion Edouard Carpentier. Again, in the whole vein of pushing Race towards main event status. Then, as we get down into the tri-state area of Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana, NWA World Junior Heavyweight Champion Ken Mantell, aside from a few title defenses against the likes of Skandor Akbar, was also engaged in a feud with Ronnie Garvin, in which, they would trade victories back and forth, but Garvin would have a slight advantage. Garvin, though, of course, was a little too heavy to be considered a junior heavyweight, so none of these matches were for the junior heavyweight championship. But, the NWA junior heavyweight champion. As we move on to Texas, I said Jack Briscoe had defended his title throughout Texas against the likes of Dory Funk Jr., Ricky Romero, Jose Lothario, and Ciclone Negro, and Red Bastien. And then John Tolos would come to Texas to, as a heel and take the Texas title from Al Madril. Then as we move out west to the West Coast, the NWA Americas title had become vacant when Greg Valentine, the holder of the Americas title, had to vacate the title to get a shot at Jack Briscoe for the NWA World Heavyweight title. Um, with that with that vacancy, they held a tournament, and on May the 2nd, Don Morocco would win the Americas title in the tournament final, only to drop the Americas title to Les Thornton, who came down from Canada, came down from Stampede. Um, Also, a build up in terms of a tag team rivalry between two well known teams at the time, the Hollywood Blondes, comprised of Jerry Brown and Buddy Roberts, the same Buddy Roberts who would later become the manager of the Freebirds, under the management of Sir Oliver Humperdinck, and Black Gordman and Great Goliath, who were basically known throughout the Southwest and in Mexico for their work. Um, and then as we conclude with the NWA, head over to some of the other promotions. The AWA, you had in the beginning of May, AWA awarding the AWA British Empire Heavyweight Championship to Billy Robinson, in which he would start defending throughout the AWA territory. As well as at one point, the AWA World Tag Team Champions, um, Nick Bockwinkel and Ray Stevens, dropping the tag team titles to Dusty Rhodes and Ivan Putski, only to have the titles returned to the previous champions due to the fact that Putski was replacing superstar Billy Graham at a show in Winnipeg. They were not the original scheduled. So their manager, Bobby the Brain Heenan, who was managing Bockwinkel and Stevens at the time, successfully petitioned the AWA to have the title returned. This is all. This is all going through the part two that Nick Bockwinkel was starting to be groomed to be a main event single star as well, and Ray Stevens going back and forth between the AWA and like the Western States Territory and St. Louis, be like going back and forth between the territories there as well. And then you get in, then you also get into, you go to Indianapolis where um, Ox Baker was enjoying a dominant run as WWA World Heavyweight Champion, with his feared Heart Punch. And then we get into the Outlaw promotion, the IWA International Wrestling Association, in which you had Mil Mascaras and the Mongols dominating the scene there. So, in which Mil Mascaras was involved in a rivalry, fending off um, the attempts by Eric the Red to become the IWA heavyweight world / international heavyweight champion. And then you also saw the early development of Dino Bravo as a wrestler here, in which he was teaming with Gino Brito as they'd come down at the closure of the Montreal promotions. They had decided to join up with the IWA. Among some of the other stars that come from other promotions include Ivan Koloff coming over from the Mid-Atlantic. Ivan Koloff and Rip Hawk coming over from the Mid-Atlantic territory. You had like Luis Martinez coming over from Big Time Wrestling Detroit. You had Mighty Igor wrestling some for them as well from the from the from the coming over from Michigan, Ontario areas. So yeah, so that's about all of the big news going on at that time. Um, you guys can check the link below. You can check my Discord if you'd like. Contact me directly through my Discord. If you'd, you can contact me directly there. Also, you can check the links below. I don't think I have any link. on these videos. So anyways, if you guys like the content, please consider liking, commenting, sharing, subscribing. I always look forward to the conversation with you guys. I hope you guys enjoy this historical retrospect on pro wrestling, and I will see you later. Bye.